you know what's unethical? Wakefield being bottom of Super League. We've just built this stand, and it's half built now. So we 20 years on, we built a thing, and they won't let us score points. It's not fair. All these big boys like Lee, they won't let us score points, and it's very unethical of Derek Beaumont to not say to his team, let's let him score some points, lads. You know, he's busy having a fight with what's his name, Nick Fozzard on the Twitter about his big arm pad and all that, and now
it's the greatest of ironies though for Wakefield, isn't it? That they've played in that ground with having not really changed very much. The word
substandard.
Well, it is, and I don't think they would disagree with that themselves. It is a shame for the competition to see a new stand going up and to not see the performances on the field that go with that. But
although the argument that goes with that is that's why IMG's grading will reward that, rather than it just be solely 100% about what they're doing on the pitch at the moment. That investment in the stand is not wasted.
No, it's not, but it can't be to the detriment of what you see on the field, because I think by his own admission this week, Mark Applegarth said it's not good enough for Super League in terms of what they're delivering on field, and I think that's true. So you've got to have balance, haven't you? You can't just put all your eggs in one basket in terms of a stand or whatever it is, facilities, and then forget what your product on the field.
But they seem to make... We talked about this at the beginning of the season when we were looking at everybody's prospects. They seem to make a conscious decision, which economically may be exactly the right decision for where they are, to pare back for this year. And a lot of the investment in the facilities is the £2 million they've got from Wakefield Council, which is great that it's being input into that. It's going to enable them to do a lot more junior development on match days because they'll have the capacity to do it. Theoretically, it will give them the chance to have more corporate investment, although you'd have to say that's mitigated against if you're in the Championship. But there will still be people that will want to come and have a pleasurable match day experience that they can't at the moment. I think it's more to do with that they made a conscious decision to not have a big enough squad, and they made a conscious decision to promote a coach who was going to be put in a very difficult position to manage that squad, and those chickens are coming home to roost now.
I agree. Well, it's not a surprise for most people in the sport, is it, that Wakefield are the bottom of Super League?
I think the issue is that they just can't score points. They're competitive for 30, 35
47
minutes.
in 9 games is pathetic.
Yeah, but then
there's no other word.
They're exhausted with no reward, and that defensive effort has taken it out of them. And attacking wise, there's no go forward.
5 games out of 9 without a point, and averaging just over 5 points a game, and that includes what did they score 26 in round 1? So if you tip that out and average it out, it's even worse. I don't know what the answer is. I mean, I get the impression they're standing by Mark Applegarth.
Which really they have to, because unfortunately, if he was dispensed with, and we have to remember that James Ford is in the background, who's waited at least 10 years to have an opportunity to coach Super League. So if they did decide to move those two around, and I still think they'd find a place for Mark Applegarth to go back to looking after the reserve grade and the pathways. I don't think they'd dispense with him, but that virtually would be the end of his head coaching career as a Super League coach, which would be very harsh, because I'm not sure what more he could have done.
I'm not sure it would have been the job I would have taken if I would have been Mark Applegarth, but he may not have really had much choice, because you have to show an intent by throwing your hat in the ring, and then when you get given the nod, you sort of take it. I don't know. They almost look like, it almost feels from the outside looking in that they've preempted where the game's heading in terms of IMG, and they may be gambling on, if we do get relegated, we get the new stand, we've got an academy, we've got X, Y and Z in place, we feel that we're a strong enough club to get back into Super League. That's a big gamble to take.
That they then are proposing to vote against the IMG proposals.
It is, and then you've obviously got an outgoing chairman, owner,
chief executive.
Sorry,
the thing about that is, if you're going to bring new investment in somewhere along the line, and there is potential in a city that doesn't have a professional football team and quite a good catchment area outside of the fact that we know already about Featherstone and Castleford being on their doorstep, there is quite a lot for Wakefield to go out south of the city, going onto that border with South Yorkshire. That you would say that if you're going to tempt an investor in to take over from Michael Carter, then a grading system whereby it isn't solely about we need to spend the salary cap and buy the best players we can might be an attraction. So again, why necessarily would you vote against a proposal that would put off a future potential investor when you're looking to withdraw from your position? So they will have their own reasons for doing it, and there'll be some assurances that they've asked for that they possibly don't feel they've got about how they would get back into Super League having invested in the ground. But I think the issue is for whatever reason, and again I suspect it was economic, a lot of their high earners went at the end of last season. That may or may not have been a really wise thing to do, to get rid of all of them at once. But the quality of player they could then bring in with the salary cap they were working with was never going to replace those players. So we shouldn't be surprised that with a couple of injuries, particularly to spine positions, their squad was exposed to the extent that they've had to take 4 loan players from other Super League squads that are not 100% dissimilar to their own. So they're taking the players that can't get in.
Yeah, are the academy players at Wakefield any worse than the academy players at Wigan? I mean, obviously, Wigan win academy grand finals or whatever, so that's not a good example. But let's go with Huddersfield.
It's Huddersfield and Hull.
But if you're a Wakefield academy player and you're thinking, hang on a minute, why can't I get in the first team? They're not losing, they're not winning, they're not scoring any points, and yet they're bringing in somebody else from outside that arguably is not much better than me. Why don't I get? Why don't I get a go? And maybe
they have to go to France apparently.
Yeah, and I saw that tweet. But why not give them a go? Because
what can you lose?
Mark's Applegarth suggested this week about players, particularly in that second half, almost taking the wrong choice, not playing for each other. Actually, maybe just give a bit of youth a go and see what you get. It can't be any worse.
Well, I mean, I've
particularly for the next 2 weeks, they've got Warrington and Wigan, haven't they? Or Wigan and Warrington coming up.
And then they've got Hull after that.
Nobody would bank on them securing a win in those 2 games. So maybe the next 2 games is an opportunity to blood some youngsters and do something different. Something has to change, is what I'm trying to get to, because you can't keep doing the same thing.
If it was the coach.
Well, I mean, he's been given a deck of cards, but I don't know how many of those cards he selected.
But the thing about that is he knew when he took the job that he had a relatively weak squad, that most people were predicting they would finish 12th. That squad has been slightly reduced by injury, but it's not his fault that he's got that squad. What I'm saying is, if it's the end of his head coaching career, that'd be really tough on him.
I agree. I mean, again, looking from the outside in, my impression was that players last season had an influence on the decision to get rid of with the poaching.
Yeah.
So I'm then wondering, well, hang on a minute, you've got rid of your coach, now you've got a new coach, and you're not winning, you're not performing. I appreciate lots of players went, senior players went, and they have got injuries. But you'd have to ask those players that were involved in that feedback process, well, hang on a minute, you wanted change, you've got change, you're not keeping your end of the bargain up. I think I saw a slight change this week from Mark Applegarth in that he put pressure back on the team, I think probably for the first time this season.
The danger with that is you've then got to go into training on Monday and mould this group together.
You do, but I think what you saw was...
because you're a rookie coach, then players will turn around and say, well, who are you to tell us? You've gone in the press and you basically said some of us aren't trained. So which one of us do you think aren't? And then how do you?
I think that'll be obvious from those who aren't picked, won't it? I mean, Tex Hoy wasn't picked at the weekend, was he, against Leeds? I don't know if he was injured.
I think he's injured, yeah.
Yeah, but I don't know. It's a difficult situation. I don't know what the vibe is amongst the Wakefield fans. I saw Michael Carter's message, I think, today.
Not great.
I think I can understand Michael Carter's frustration in so much as that for the last however long he's been in charge of the club has said we need X amount of fans to be able to spend up to the salary cap, and I don't think he's criticising. Well, he's criticising the fans who are having to go on Facebook and Twitter and whatever. Yeah, he is. But how many of those are actually paying to go to the games?
Well, I have to say,
those that aren't.
My experience of being an official going to Wakefield, particularly as a touch judge, because you hear more of it, is you actually hear the number of times I heard Wakefield fans having a go at Wakefield players was far too often. So I actually think Michael Carter has a valid point.
He does, but it's a bit naive when you've lost 32-0 at home.
Yeah, I would say, and I'm not going to say the coach is perfect, because obviously you can't have a record of 0-9 and be perfect, but professional rugby league players in an elite competition must look at themselves and think, we haven't scored points in 5 games. How have we not scored a single point. Teams do not defend perfectly against Wakefield and then fail to defend perfectly against every other team in the division. So you've got to stand up to yourself and say, whatever game plan the coach is giving us, and Scully's been in the studio a million times to say what players do and what coaches say, and what players do, that's nothing to do with what the coaches say. Those players can't come out there and somehow not score points. I just can't reconcile that in my brain. We can get on the coach's back as much as you want, but if the players aren't performing, and I've got my ideas, and I've not seen Wakefield live this year, so it's unfair for me to say, and I'm obviously I'm in a privileged position where I wouldn't have to pay if I wanted to. Well, I use my wife's season tickets, so she there are players who I'd have nowhere near the club, and it's obvious who those players are, or some of those players are. But if you're a professional and you don't have pride in your performance not to be at a certain level,
again...
And it goes for Hull as well.
Well, before we come on to that, because that is the obvious next place.
Because pound for pound, they're worse.
I just wanted to mention that I think Lee's performances in the early weeks of the season, particularly that victory at Wakefield, has probably taken them out of that relegation battle.
Yeah, because the gamble might have been Lee might implode at some point, or Lee are not going to gel.
Yeah, Lee have got an ageing side, and they've put all of their hopes on very experienced players to make a big noise early in the season to get themselves enough points to make them safe. And then if they do go through a period where they've either got injuries or players need some time off, or there aren't enough juniors coming through to fill the gaps where they need to, it's not going to matter, because they now probably have condemned Wakefield to at least 5 wins when they haven't had any out of 9. That is possibly already enough to save Lee, I think, this season, which is a massive credit that we're a third of the way in the season and the promoted team have done enough to stay up. So I think that probably needs mentioning. On the whole side of things, just going back to what you said about players have always got something to play for. If there are 20 players out of contract, and if you assume that 10 of them are playing to retain their contract at Hull, the other 10 are playing to get a contract somewhere else. So I'm not sure that argument about just because you're out of contract, it holds some sway. It's very hard to get a team unity when some know that they're not going to be there next year, some know that this current coach doesn't rate them and he's told them that perhaps they don't have a future. And that's what Darryl Powell had to deal with at Warrington last year. But I'm not sure I buy into this just because you're out of contract means you're not going to try. There's always a contract you're aspiring to get, even if it's at another club.
Yeah, I think it depends how... Tony Smith is going in there to change the way it's run, isn't he? There's no doubt about that. Otherwise, why bring somebody in? Something has to change. So it's how that change is brought about. And, I understand that the way in which Darryl Powell did it last year upset, ruffled the feathers amongst the players. Not just, I appreciate...
Particularly the senior players.
Yeah, I appreciating that, yes, a number were off contract, but getting away from that, which I think is a valid point, is that he ruffled the feathers and almost sort of said, look, you're prima donnas in a way. I'm not suggesting that those were his words, but that sentiment in a way. You don't know what's being said behind the scenes at Hull. People generally don't like change, do they?
No.
And people usually rebel against change. Now, whether you've seen an element of that, I don't know. Whether you've seen an element of confusion in what Tony's trying to deliver in terms of the way they attack or the way they defend, it's very difficult to say. I think you're right. It's not a one-dimensional argument around players just being off contract. I think that has to be disruptive, though. If players are looking over the shoulder, am I being retained? Am I not being retained? I've got a mortgage to pay at the end of going into next year. Am I going to get a Super League club? Am I going to be dropping down into part-time rugby league?
And I don't want to get injured if I'm going to another club at the end of the season.
So I think they have to tie up. I would think sooner rather than later those players who are they're keeping.
And I think that's probably started because May the 1st, I think you're allowed, if you're off contract, you're allowed to start negotiating. So that will be happening. And I also think that Tony likes to play his rugby a certain way, and I'm not sure he's inherited a squad that can play that way. A squad has been built with power, number one, or overpowering. That's the way Brett Hodgson wanted to play. Tony wants to play a far more expansive brand. That's very hard to bring in, even in one off-season, especially if half of the players that you want to try and teach that way aren't going to be there next year.
Yeah.
So I can see that, again, listening to him in press conference, there is a massive amount of frustration that he is hiding at the moment. with what he wants to do and how he wants to do it, the worst thing Hull could do and Hull fans could call for is for him not to be there.
I just don't think that will happen. I believe he's had the backing of Adam Pearson. I know that's usually fateful if you get the backing of your chairman, but I don't envisage a situation whereby Tony Smith is sacked this season, because otherwise why bring him in? He's one of the most experienced Super League coaches, and no matter what you may think of him, you can't deny his experience and his ability to improve teams generally where he's been. So I don't see that changing.
He's done that at 4 clubs.
Yeah,
and it took time at Huddersfield.
Yeah.
He inherited everything he needed at Leeds. He started to rebuild a culture at Warrington that wasn't there. Unfortunately for him, just couldn't get the prize they wanted. He got some others along the way. Started to turn things around at Hull KR. They again became entertainers again with him at the helm. So everywhere he's been, may not have been immediate, but he has sowed the seeds of long-term change and success.
And I think that's the point. I think we've made it before. It won't be immediate, and I think the Hull FC fans have just got to stick patient.
But it's worse than anybody expected it.
Oh no, I think it is. But I think if you're a Hull FC fan, you probably your saving grace from their point of view is probably, sadly, for you, Wakefield Trinity.
It's Wakefield. It's just Wakefield.
We're only a third of the way through the season, so who knows what might happen in that second third or in that final third. Things can change. They may recruit some players. They may suddenly start finding a little bit of form. They pick up one win and it snowballs into 2. You just don't know, do you? But
the trouble is, though, again, to find some players, there has to be finance. And one of the things Mark Applegarth said after Sunday, when he probably was the most open and heartfelt he'd been in all the press conference he gave, he did talk about, we're looking for recruits, but it will be determined by economics. Well, again, depending on which pool you're allowed to fish in, will or won't change your fortunes. If Corrie Hall going out and Will Dagger coming in arguably didn't improve the squad, which is no disrespect to Will Dagger. They just weren't bringing in somebody who was better than Corrie Hall. And if they're going to have to shop around in the lower divisions of the French league, then it's not going to change their fortunes around.
I mean, it's not ironic, but Mark Applegarth probably needs what Chris Chester had alongside him at Wakefield, an experienced coach above him. If Tony Smith was with Mark Applegarth,
I'm not sure, because I think whoever is the coach at Wakefield can only work with the resource that they've got. And if you're John Keir or Tony Smith, and you're still looking at that same team sheet.
Yeah, I do wonder whether Mark and James Ford are having conversations with trusted people around.
I'm sure they probably are.
In your experience, vast experience, when you've encountered a situation like this,
what's the best way of getting
this
out?
Is what we're doing. Yeah. What do you think? Because that's what we do in life. No matter what field we work in, don't you? You ask people for advice and support. You don't necessarily take it, but you can ask them. I think I'm pretty sure that has to be happening.
I mean, usually what you do in this situation, if you sign Stuart Fielding for a world record, but break the salary cap, relegate Castleford and stay up. But unfortunately, Stuart Fielding's retired and Wakefield don't have the money to do that. So.
But it's lined up for a humdinger, isn't it? In what? Not 3 weeks, because there's the international break.
Weeks,
but yeah, 2 or 3 rounds. Yeah, against Hull. Where's that at? Is that at Wakefield? Yeah. Hull. I'm not sure if it makes a difference really. Does it?
This week on the Super League website. I'll be a while I'm on the Super League website. By the way, now the sport's all together in one organisation. Why don't the Super League Twitter, which is now under the auspices of the Rugby commercial, is that what it's called? Why don't they tweet about the other competitions which bear the name Super League, like the Women's Super League and the Wheelchair Super League, both of which are underway now?
Just saying, on the pitch, the Wakefield pitch, my understanding again with that £2 million they got from Wakefield Council, part of that was about having more community involvement.
Yes.
And by having an element of synthetic in your pitch means that you get greater use of the pitch. So one would expect people to be hiring that pitch during the week.
Yeah, and Wakefield Football Club are playing now.
Yes.
Wakefield FC.
Okay.
Is it Wakefield FC?
Yeah,
they're going to be the winter tenant.
Right.
So commercially, they're going the right way.
Yeah, absolutely.
Great news for you, James. Great news for me. Great news for everyone. Is that Wakefield Hull is on the telly on the 11th of May because the pitch is great now. No stories about the pitch this week, were there? Nothing about
0-0.
The pitch
It could be a 0-0. Could be 0-0. Couldn't it?
Sky Sports, 8 o'clock, Thursday, 11th of May. Put it in your diaries now, kids. I think I might be working. I'm going to ask to work. I work for free.
I reckon that'll be like sitting at the guillotine in revolutionary France, knitting.
So described Wakefield Castle as El Crapico, but I don't know how. We can't even use the words to describe what this will be. Oh, dearie me.
Wakefield normally do all right against Hull, though.
We scored 70 against them the other year. That was good, yeah, but that's, you know.
They've got 17 total.
Who
was it? What was the stat that was rolled out that Josh Chalney had scored more points this year than Wakefield?
London Scholars have scored more points, and they've played less than half the number of games. And London Scholars are also, you know, bottom of the whole pyramid of professional rugby league. He says with
you need to let it go.
professional. I know. Maybe the people buying London Scholars could come by Wakefield.
I do wonder though.
The
longer that goes on, we said this earlier on in the a few weeks ago. The longer it goes on where you don't score, it must become a massive.
We need the German
thing in the
fans
team.
with the big arrows behind the goal.
They're almost begging for the Challenge Cup to come and to get the lowest ranked team in the cup,
so they can get
some points.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? But actually, when you come to the lowest ranked team,
the pressure ramps up.
I think it might only be Dewsbury. I think they're the only League One team left. I think they play London away, don't they?
Yeah.
And with the way that they're playing,
that local derby, Wakefield Dewsbury.
Well, yeah, and the way that Dewsbury are playing, it might not be a surprise if they beat London. It would be a good fixture, but also I think that would be a pressure fixture for them.
Absolutely.
When Wakefield played Lee a couple of years ago on the telly, Wakefield only squeaked past them. Only squeaked past Bradford in my brief reign of terror working at the club.
But remember, Dewsbury is a League One club. If
but
they
Wakefield
to get
championship
into that next round, but yeah, it almost feels like they need the old Challenge Cup where they play the amateur side and rack up 80 points.
It's getting worse. Oh, let me put pressure on St Helens instead. Because, speaking of rookie coaches, Paul Wellens, he's no good either. St Helens are world champions, 4 wins from 8 games. They lost at Hull Kingston Rovers against rookie coach Willie Peters, so I don't know where we go on that one. But okay, they're doing well. They're doing well. 26-16, they're third in the table, above the Catalan Dragons, just behind the leaders Warrington and Wigan. Let's praise Hull Kingston Rovers. Carson says we should make Pray for Wakey t-shirts. So. It's beyond that. It's beyond that now.
The thing about Hull KR is that they've got a settled spine, and all 3 good enough to be picked for England's extended squad. They are playing some great rugby, and they've got a couple of really hard-working forwards. I think George King has been absolutely massive this year.
Another former Wakefield
probably hasn't got the raps he deserves. I haven't mentioned Batchelor. But he's been brilliant leading them forward. They've got 2 hookers that can change a game, either if they're on together or one replacing the other. Halfbacks that are young, dynamic, and have a potential international career ahead of them, and some great experience in the 3 quarters. And you put all that together and you keep those on the field for long enough and you can start winning some games. You've got a passionate home crowd to play from them. You know, they've beaten St Helens, Wigan and Leeds at home already this year, which, at the start of the season, you go, who are, 3 of the bigger teams that we're going to get at our midding, and you've already beaten all of them at home. That is seriously impressive.
But I think towards the back end of last year, forgive me if I'm wrong, they were losing quite a number of games. Tony Smith ended up leaving. So, whatever Willie Peters is doing, he's doing a good job. But I think you make a really valid point about the settled squad and the spine. But I think they're probably exceeding their own fans' expectations at the moment, lying in 3rd in the table. But the more points you pick up at this stage of the season, it eases the pressure later on in the year. I'm not suggesting that they'll finish in the bottom half, because I don't think they will. At the moment, you definitely suggest they would finish in the playoffs with the way they're playing.
2 half-backs coaching them, so they play relatively attractive. Their initial instinct isn't to grind their way to victories. They're given a licence to play. Lachlan Coote, who could well be in his last year at full-back, is recapturing some of the form we saw when he was at St Helens. It's a good. Their recruitment has been as good as it could be within the terms of the budget that they operate in. And again, I reckon that's the difference perhaps between Hull, who seem to have a bit of a stagnant squad that they need to prune desperately. Hull KR over the last couple of years have brought in exactly the right sort of players. They've got some young local talent starting to come through as well. Of the 2, one model's clearly working at the moment.
Yeah, and I think there's lots of positive stuff going on off the field as well.
Yeah.
The rebrand I thought was good. I thought that it was a good rebrand, and the directors that appear to have brought in, I think they've announced this week that they're going for planning, I believe, on
Yeah,
a
3G
pitch.
Which again opens up
It
community use.
looks rather tightly squeezed in into that corner, to be honest. It sort of eats into Craven Street to me. But anyway, you know, I think you're seeing positive signs.
Which
in the way in
again,
which
going
the
back
clubs
to
run.
where we started, is this all on the back of IMG? Because virtually every director who's come in have said, I've been prepared to invest because I can see the direction of travel the game is going in. I can see we own our own stadium. I can see that we've got a structure within our pathways now that is going to get local young kids through. I'm happy to invest in something like that because we're not going to become a yo-yo club that's looking over our shoulder worrying about relegation.
I think arguably yes, but I would suggest it was already happening anyway. But I think it's probably continued because, you know, who's the investor that's coming into Wakefield to take over from Michael Carter? You know, and where are all the other investors?
That's no good, is it?
You know, where's the investor taking over at Hull to take Adam Pearson's role?
Exactly.
Because, you know, some Hull FC fans have questioned his role because, you know, their continued underperformance.
But nobody's coming forward. He keeps saying in all of his interviews, "I'll go tomorrow if somebody comes in and."
Yeah, and how many clubs? Do you
any.
hear that? That's what I'm trying to say. So I think you're possibly right with the IMG, but I think it'd be wrong to suggest it's just because of that.